Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophets Speak. This is Isaiah 5b, the second part of chapter 5 of Isaiah. And this is Saul Weinreb, your host for this podcast. In the last podcast, we heard Isaiah as he sang to us God's song to the Jewish people, the song of a lover betrayed. Now he begins to be more specific about his criticisms of the corrupt leadership of the Jewish people. Until this point, Isaiah castigated the people for their unjust and corrupt society and criticized their contempt and lack of concern for the poor and the helpless. But now he becomes much more detailed in their behavior and how a selfish focus of life neglects and takes advantage of the poor. Furthermore, the systems of justice that they develop are designed to make the rich richer and the poor poorer. We will end with a verse that takes aim at those who are skeptical of God, those who seem to think that because they don't see him do justice today, that he must not exist, or at least he must not care to intervene. The verse begins, Hoi magi'e bayes bebayes, sode besode yakrivu, ad efes makom, v'hu shavtem levadchem bekerev haaretz. Woe to those who acquire more and more property, and they build up their own estates by forcing their poor neighbors to sell out their land, until the poor are homeless and the rich have large estates. Unfortunately, we are all too familiar with such behavior throughout human history until our own day. The next verse continues, Bi'aznei Adonai tzivaot im lo batim rabim l'shama yiyu, gedolim v'tovim me'en yoshev. In my ears, Isaiah says, God whispered, that these great big mansions will one day be destroyed and remain without inhabitants, and these wonderful large estates will soon one day have no one dwelling there. Ki aseret tzimdei kerem ya'asu bat echat, v'zera chomer ya'aseh ephah. For 10 acres of vineyard shall yield just one measure, because they will be so impoverished, as 10 large measures of land will only yield one measure worth of crops. Hoi mashkime vaboker sheichar yirdofu, me'acharei baneshef yayin yadlikem. Woe to those who chase liquor from early in the morning until late in the evening are inflamed by wine. God criticized the people for taking advantage of the poor and building their wealth at the expense of the poor. Now he turns toward their behavior as a wealthy class. Did they spend their time doing worthy pursuits? No, God says, woe is to those who upon awakening are already searching for liquor, and until late in the evening they are inflamed and consumed by wine. V'haya kinor v'nevel tof v'chalil v'yayin mishtehem, v'et poel Adonai lo yabitu, u'ma'aseh yadav lo ra'u. They sought pleasure and entertainment with their wealth. Instead of using their resources for more proper purposes, their time of leisure which could have been devoted to good, time which could have been devoted to seeking knowledge, wisdom, and godly pursuits, was instead wasted on drunken parties. Worst of all, says God, they missed out on learning about God's wonderful and beautiful creations. It is interesting to note that the ultimate loss that Isaiah laments is not the loss of spiritual pursuits in the temple, but rather it is the loss of the potential for knowledge about the world around us that God created. U'ma'aseh yadav lo ra'u. They wasted their time. Lachein gala ami mibli da'as, uchvodo misei ra'av, v'hamono tzichei tzama. This is the reason for the suffering of my people. My people will be exiled mibli da'as. This can be interpreted several ways, but I'm going to interpret as follows, mibli da'as, because they did not seek knowledge. Because they did not seek knowledge, that is why they are being exiled. Uchvodo, those who are honorable formerly are now dying of hunger, v'hamonot tzichei tzama, and the masses are dying of thirst. Lachein, for this reason, hirchiva she'ol nafsho u'fa'araf v'halev lichok, v'yorad hadara v'hamona'u she'ona v'olaz ba. This is why hell has opened its soul and widened its mouth immeasurably to swallow whole all of that din of pleasure seekers, partiers, and revelers who did all of that at the expense of others. Vayishach adam vayishpal ish ve'enei gvohim tishpalna. And yes, men will be brought to bow, and the haughty will be lowered. Vayigba Adonai tziva'os b'mishpat v'yoel hakadosh nikdash b'tzedakah. This verse is again central to the prayers of the high holidays. Here Isaiah tells us how God should truly have been worshipped, which could have prevented all destruction. And the Lord of hosts, God, is exalted by judgment, by mishpat, by justice. And the holy God, nikdash b'tzedakah, is made holy by righteousness. True justice and true righteousness, the recurrent theme of this book, tzedek u'mishpat. If only we had practiced these principles, if only. But one day the humble shall be the residents of Jerusalem, and tzedek u'mishpat will rule again. Some look at this verse as stating that one day when the haughty will be punished and the righteous will be rewarded, and that day God will be made great. That's what it means, Vayigba Adonai tzvos b'mishpat. I would like to suggest an alternate interpretation, that this is really advice for Isaiah to the people there now. Do you want to prevent this from happening, this destruction that I'm predicting? If you want to prevent this, the way to do it is through mishpat and tzedakah. That is how you make God great, rather than the haughty and the proud great. And then, should that happen, or one day in the future when that does happen, then the lambs, the weak, shall graze as in their meadows through those grand fields and estates that used to be owned and controlled by the powerful and wealthy. And the ruins of the great mansions will be consumed and eaten and by gerim, by converts, people who weren't even part of the Jewish people, but joined God's people out of true devotion. They will be the ones eating from the fields of Judah that were abandoned by those who were haughty and proud. Hoy moshchei ha'avon b'chavlei hashav v'cha'avos ha'agalah chata'ah. Woe to those who haul sin with cords of falsehood and iniquity as with cart ropes, is the way the Jewish Publication Society translates this pasuk, this verse. I would like to suggest an alternate reading. There are several ways to interpret it, but I'll suggest as follows. Woe is to those who are dragged by sin with ropes of falsehood and are dragged by iniquity like the chains of a wagon. This is because those who are steeped in evil become bound to it and tied to it, making it harder and harder to change. And why is this? Because of what they say in the next verse. Ha'omrim, those that say, Yimaher yachisha, ma'asehu leman nireh, v'tikra v'tavoa atzas kedosh Yisrael v'neidah. Those who say, who are the ones that are bound to sin with those chains and those ropes? Those who, Isaiah says, those who respond to my rebuke by mocking me. Those who say, where is this God? You're warning us about this God. Tell him to hurry up and punish us so that we can see him. Let's see this holy God so we can know him. How many times have we heard such words of mockery? Ha, if there is a God, let him strike me with lightning. Must be he doesn't exist. And then they continue to laugh and revel and drink until true justice arrives. This concludes this podcast, Isaiah 5b. Looking forward to seeing you again for the third and final podcast on Isaiah chapter 5.